Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. Wow, we are really just bouncing around on our topics the last little while, aren't we? But this one is actually something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I've just been waiting for the right motivation. Well, I don't know if it's a lot of the responses I've been seeing to the last video I made, seeing these kinds of interactions on social media, or what, but, well, I believe I've found my motivation. Folks, it's time to talk about taking the black pill and why it's such a terrible idea to do so. So, first of all, let's start with a definition. When I talk about taking the black pill, I'm meaning falling into a pattern of nihilism, of believing that nothing matters, that nothing you do will change anything, that life is just bleak and therefore there's no point in fighting or doing much of anything, really. I've seen a range of black-pilled behavior, from being black-pilled on one or more specific subjects to just being black-pilled about life as a general whole. While both of these involve similar attitudes, I think that they come with different drawbacks, but we'll get into that and some examples thereof in a bit. With many of the topics I do, I tend to kind of pick a general approach I would like to take and then build the video around that. With this video, I'm going to start empathetic, but then I'm moving into tough love territory pretty quickly because I think this is such an important one to either avoid straight up or cast out of your lives as quickly as possible. That said, I'll start off by saying, hey, I absolutely get it during the current times we are living in. Somehow, in the last decade, it seems like everyone has absolutely lost their damn minds in any sort of socio-political sense. The divide amongst people of any number of different traits, sex, ethnicity, political ideology, you name it, seems to be Grand Canyon-sized and ever-expanding, to the point where many people question when or how it will ever get better. You can't throw a rock without hitting someone talking about some stressful stuff going on in the world, like wars and conflicts and climate change and so on and so forth. And what's worse, it's getting harder to afford even the bare necessities for survival because it's verboten to suggest we have any sort of regulations in place to put a stop to the runaway costs in seemingly any domain of life. So this, along with the fact that many of us just so happen to have a handy-dandy tool in our hands, maybe even right now as we speak, that gives us access to 24/7 on-demand social media access that is designed to funnel us towards the most stressful, controversial topics to drive engagement, means that we are living in an environment with nigh-on perfect conditions for fostering distress, distrust, despair, and yes, nihilism. I like to joke with some of my clients who are considering taking antidepressant medication that they should be very careful to confirm whether they are experiencing true clinical depression or if they are instead experiencing a bad case of life just sucks. Because in the latter category, medication is likely to have only limited effectiveness without addressing some of the root causes. All of this to say that it feels like more and more of us are developing chronic cases of life just sucks, and when that happens, it's easy to see how people can fall into the bad habit of taking the black pill. Only this kind of pill makes no kind of attempt to do anything positive like slowing reuptake of crucial happiness neurotransmitters. No, unfortunately, the kind of attitude represented by the black pill is toxic, insidious, and deceptively addictive for how terrible a mindset it is. Returning back to my initial definition, I'll provide some examples now of the black pill mindset as applied to both a single topic versus life in general. Regarding single topics, an easy example to draw from that many of us are likely familiar with is in the Scorned Lover, either male or female, who has one or two bad experiences with the opposite sex, and then proceeds to declare that all men are this or all women are that, and determines that they're completely done with interacting with the opposite sex in any sort of positive manner whatsoever. Another example, and truthfully the one that inspired this video in the first place, could be seen in some of the responses to my previous video on therapy being useful for men so long as you find a proper therapist. I'm talking about the responses that took the hardline stance that the profession is too ideologically captured and therefore it is a total loss, and no men should or even truly ever can make use of it. Fortunately, folks who take a black pill approach to one topic like this will often have reasonably healthy attitudes towards many other things in life, and may have plenty of healthy alternatives to the thing they are jaded on to keep themselves occupied. Additionally, people who take this attitude towards certain things in their lives may truly believe they are protecting themselves from something that will hurt them. Nevertheless, taking such a hardline negative stance can often prevent them from experiencing the full richness of various domains of life. It can also result in the loss of important tools, fields, areas of study, and more, if enough people take a stance that something simply isn't worth it. This is a problem that I'll explore more deeply later on. On the other hand, more broad examples of taking the black pill in life can be seen in those who believe that the world is ending, or at the very least not getting any better, who take on misanthropic or other more general pessimistic attitudes, and who otherwise just tend to float through life with very little joy or appreciation for anything. There may or may not be an element of sour grapes in folks with this kind of attitude. I've seen folks who express black pill sentiments because they feel they can't achieve anything they want, and I've similarly seen folks who just don't care either way. Unlike those folks in the former category, these people tend to be less likely to have any healthy outlets for caring for themselves. They may be more likely to fall into unhealthy habits, experience social isolation, perpetuate negative downward spirals, and may even be more likely to attempt suicide. Now, I'm not sure about you guys, but I don't happen to think this sounds like a particularly enjoyable mindset to have. Somehow, despite that, it's an easy trap to get stuck in and stay stuck in. Like falling into a tar pit. Eventually you just sink and get stuck and eventually drown in it. How does this initially happen? Well, there can be a number of reasons. The most tragic examples are generally seen in children who grow up in abusive households. These children are far more vulnerable to many factors that would contribute to the development of a black pill mindset. Mistrust of caregivers and others, increased likelihood of bullying and being bullied, increased likelihood of getting in with the wrong crowd and engaging in drugs or risky behaviors, susceptibility to getting into abusive relationships down the line, so on and so forth. Other people may fall into the mindset because of bad luck. They may not be the best looking or be the best at social skills, and therefore may become isolated and fall into despair. A modifying factor here is the extent to which people are simply ignored versus outright rejected or shunned by others, the latter being obviously much worse. Still others may surround themselves either online or offline with those who espouse black pill attitudes and fall into it as well. Even those who have plenty of good things going for them can fall into it just by thoughtless use of social media that winds up feeding them more and more misery-crafting, conspiracy-supporting, stress-inducing content to the point where they begin to truly believe the world is much, much worse off than it otherwise would seem if they simply put down the phone and touched grass. But what, then, is so appealing about this mindset? There's a list of most likely benefits that I can suggest. First of all, it's easy. Taking the black pill is literally giving yourself permission to give up on any or all elements of life. Therefore, it doesn't require any of that pesky hard work or self-reflection that may take a modicum of effort. Secondly, on a related note, if you really come to believe the things that the black pill mindset espouses, it can be easy to justify bad or selfish behaviors because, hey, if the world truly sucks as much as it does, what is the harm in just looking out for number one? Third, it may in some way serve some measure of protection for those who take the black pill, but not in the way they may be thinking. Fighting the tides of bullshit in the world is an extremely difficult job, and you not only might, but definitely will experience failures, even crushing ones, in taking on these battles. Again, not only is it much, much easier to simply avoid signing up for this particular job, but for those who have taken the black pill following other significant blows to their self-esteem, avoiding further crushing attacks on the self could mean the difference between simply remaining in a bad place or falling into a worse place. One of the dangers of avoidance, of course, is that even though it can offer short term relief from whatever thing it is you're trying to avoid, it can further entrench people in whatever depressive cycle they're in. Fourth, some people may be able to find community in finding like minded others to sit and commiserate with. But on this point in particular, there are some other problems I would like to address. I'm not necessarily sure what it is about these very negative mindsets, but they commonly seem to tend towards a sort of crab bucket mentality, where they try to either drag other people into their mindset, or at very least make a point to regularly tear down their objects of scorn in a public manner, even where other people are trying to express more moderate or positive positions. I'm not sure if it is some sort of subconscious attempt to justify their mindset, or if seeing other people happy and appreciating things just causes cracks in their illusions. But either way, the folks who attempt to spread their black pill mindset are definitely the most damaging of all. You can legitimately envision it as a miasma of hopelessness trying to consume others and make them give up on things. I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but I see people falling into this mindset regularly within my field of work, and I see firsthand how damaging it is to a person's well-being, and it often seems to negatively impact all those to whom that person is connected. Perhaps to better illustrate some of the problems I see with this mindset, I'll give a few examples. Let's start with the field of psychology, as per my last video. As I already mentioned, I received several comments critical of the field, many of which are fully justifiable and that I even agree with and support. Where I begin to take issue is, of course, when people start speaking in absolutes. You know, things like, the field is ideologically captured and therefore is to be written off entirely, or therapy is entirely useless and perhaps harmful to men and they should avoid it at all costs. But just for a moment, let's go with these statements. Let's act like the field is irrevocably infused with social justice nonsense, and that it's not worth challenging or fighting any of those sentiments. It's not like the field does all that much, right? Let's just let the ideologues have it. Who cares? And this may seem like little of value is lost to the folks with this mindset, but what happens when the steady march of social justice ideology isn't satisfied with just the soft sciences? What happens when people start to try to push it into as many other fields as they possibly can? Education, biology, medicine, or even things like mathematics? You know, as they already readily have been trying to do. So, does the black pill style screw it, let them have it attitude apply here? If it did, there'd certainly be a lot we'd stand to lose, wouldn't there? Unfortunately, the giving up attitude doesn't really offer much in the way of combating things like this. If those of us who disagree with the steady creep of this nonsense into all fields of our life don't like it, we're not going to change anything by sitting on our asses, shrugging our shoulders, and saying, "Screw it, too hard." Let me try another example. I have been working in men's issues for some time now. As you probably guess, and frankly, as I have directly told you, this hasn't been an easy fight, and there have been lots of crippling challenges throughout. Would it be better for me to just throw up my hands and say, "Nope, this fight's too tough, nothing is ever going to change or get better, might as well just stop trying, right? Maybe just focus exclusively on myself, some menial hobbies, whatever." Would it be better for everyone involved in men's issues, knowing how much of an uphill battle it is, to just give up and stop bothering? Let me tell you the reason why I don't do that. I feel like this is an important battle that deserves to be fought. There are people who are suffering who don't get the care that they deserve. This is an injustice, and it is a value of mine that I want to fight against injustices. Living by things that you value gives meaning to your life. This is something that I work with many of my clients to help discover and explore, especially in the face of great personal losses. But when you take the black pill, you lose a lot of that sense of meaning in life. When you act like nothing matters, you lose a lot of motivation to do much of anything, and life just becomes a dull, miserable slog hardly worth living. And what's worse, the further and further away you pull from any sort of meaningful life, the more avoidance simply becomes habit and becomes harder to change. So, we've talked a lot about why the black pill is bad. Now, let's talk about some ways to challenge it. First of all, if you want to live by your values, you have to know what those are. It is worthwhile to take time to think about what things are important to you. If you feel like nothing is currently important to you, then you can think about what you would ideally envision that you would hold as being important. You can think of certain domains of life you would like to focus on and what that would look like, or conceive of new ways to find meaning where you have previously not been looking. If you are feeling hopeless about certain elements of life, such as finding a relationship, or the idea of certain social or political causes, you can try to pour your energy into other values where things might feel less hopeless, or pick another cause to dedicate time to so that you feel like you are contributing in another way. It accomplishes much more than simply giving up or declaring that there is no point in life. Another thing you can do is either to do a social media cleanse or try to spend time specifically looking for things going right in the world. Good news often does not drive engagement like bad news, and so it can be harder to find if you are not deliberately looking for it. Furthermore, we tend to fall into the bad habit of attending more to the things going wrong in our lives than the things going right. This was probably adaptive at one point. After all, if we respond to the things that are wrong, we may have more of a chance of survival. But now it just tends to make us feel more depressed. If we instead train ourselves to look for things going right, you may be surprised at how much better you will likely feel. A good example of this can be seen in someone who complains that nobody else knows how to drive, citing the 2 or 3 terrible drivers they encountered on their morning commute. But if you ask them how many responsible, cautious, or otherwise unremarkable drivers they encountered on the way to work, they'll likely regard you with a blank expression because they completely did not pay attention to that, even though that latter category surely made up a much more significant portion of their fellow drivers that morning. Finally, another thing we can do is to try to recognize when we may be falling into those pesky cognitive distortions I mentioned from my last video. Those logical errors very commonly feed into extreme negative thinking, where we trick ourselves into believing that everything is going wrong, nothing will ever get better, nobody likes us, and that there's no point to anything. If we start to recognize and actively challenge some of these thinking errors, you may find that you can build healthier, more realistic patterns of thinking, and that these thought patterns are much more resistant to despair. It's not always as easy as making broad generalizations about the world, of course, but hey, the best or most fulfilling things in life are rarely those things that are easiest. These are just a few of the ways to challenge black pill thinking, and I'd love for others to share their own methods in the comments in support of others who may be struggling with this. Whatever ways people choose to challenge this sort of mindset, I legitimately think it's one of the most important battles that one can overcome if they find themselves struggling with it. Think of all the great stories of the past that have inspired us. Protagonists who have fought through intense trials and overwhelming odds to overcome their problems and fight for what they believe is right. Now, instead, take any of these stories and envision that the hero simply decided that, shit's too hard. I'm going to take my ball and go home. Who cares? It's not worth bothering anyway. I think it's plain for all to see why that would make a pretty weak story. So why in the world would anyone want to emulate that kind of attitude? There's no honor in being a conquered, miserable layabout completely unwilling to fight for anything of value. Don't take the black pill, folks. It's not the sort of supplement that leads you to a better place in life. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.